Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. So we want to talk to you a little bit about some of the experiences that we have had with assisting students who have a caretaker burden while they're going to college. To give you a little bit of an overview on what brought about the idea for this panel, I want to give you a little bit of context. So Dr. Brown and I both coordinate a first-year transition program for underrepresented Oregon students. And it's focused on giving them all those college readiness skills that they need to really succeed in the first year. So a big part of what we do is identifying the needs and those barriers that our students come across. So just to give you a little bit of a view of the program demographic, depending on the year, we have anywhere from 50 to 70% of our students are first generation college students. Often, the majority of these students are also at or below the poverty level. Many of these students are also caretakers of family, and this is usually a necessary role that just simply cannot be outsourced since so many of our students are coming from low-income households. And adding into that is the additional burden of attending college. So as we have here, 60% of our students are BIPOC students. 67% of our students identified in the last year with having some sort of pandemic-related mental health concern. So next is some of the general strains that we see, mainly underrepresented students, but honestly, all first-year students coming in with. Key among those, there's the anxiety around adapting to new environments. Also, especially for our first generation students, adapting to the expectations of higher education, which are so far from previous experiences that can be a little bit frightening for them. We have social isolation, again, often with those first gen students, since they struggle enough in getting used to higher education, that really making connections on campus can be a big barrier for them. Of course, financial strain in coming to college. And then either undiagnosed mental health disorders or diagnosed disorders that are then made even worse by those pressures of college. So most students come in with a pretty substantial burden to balance as they're attending school. Adding into this, like I said, 65% of our students have identified as at one point in their school careers being caretakers for either a sibling, an aging family member, or someone in their close circle. Now, the thing about this is that we've noticed many of our students experience the same burden of care that we see with experts in the medical field. Among those, we have physical strain. So the same late nights taking care of someone. Emotional strain. So the burden of having to constantly bring up the concern for another individual. Often that financial strain is big as well. For our students, we see them prioritizing care of a family member over, say, picking up another shift at their job that might help them to pay for school. And then last but never least, that social isolation that a lot of caregivers experience. That whole idea around you are in a position that so few of your peers are in, with so many tremendous strains on you. So our student caregivers face this burden of care in addition to the process of adjusting to college. That's already really a lot to deal with. So Those student caregivers also frequently exhibit some of the same signs of depression that professional caregivers have. You know, the loss of interest, feeling sad, avoiding friends and favorite activities. The overlap faced by both the students and student caregivers is pretty substantial. So my point here being that our student caregivers face so many additional challenges that can frequently interfere with the college experience. I can't tell you how many times I've had a student that couldn't attend class because there's no one there to watch their grandmother who has dementia, or they need to pick up a shift taking care of a younger sibling. And the responses from faculty in sympathy towards these students can be varying. You know, some faculty can be very understanding, others can be maybe not quite so much as we would like. Into this already substantial burden, we have the pandemic, which I'm sure you can all attest, totally upset things for pretty much everyone. So even outside of our student caregivers, we see a lot of mental health concerns and crises. Chief among those, we have worsening or new depression and anxiety. Sometimes so bad students would have trouble, even when we came back into face-to-face courses, going into a classroom just from the sheer terror of being surrounded by so many people. So some of the things we're seeing come up from this have also been an impediment for our students. New or worsening executive dysfunction. So that time management piece that a lot of students struggle with just to start. Organization. These students are coming from an online schooling environment, often where they were left on their own to figure out a lot of expectations for courses. So switching that over to college can be a little bit difficult. And then just processing the amount of information that they were being given and the new platforms. Every day was a new bit of technology that they had to adjust to. So a recent 2021 study showed that 41% of American college students reported signs of depression or anxiety from the pandemic. These numbers increase substantially when we look at underrepresented students. So as I said before, 67% of our 2021 cohort reported depression or anxiety that either emerged during the pandemic or was substantially exacerbated by it. So student caretakers then come under this, essentially, what is a triple burden. So college can add to this in general, but it's also a chance for students to often socialize and relieve some of the stress that comes with that isolation from being a student caretaker. So when we took that and had to put it into this online format, all of a sudden, you know, they don't have that social outlet. We had students who would have to Zoom while rocking a baby or Zoom while making dinner, balancing those care expectations in a way that I don't think, you know, anyone would have expected before. So the strain on them has been pretty substantial. So coming to some of the consequences for this, in our program, especially because we have such high risk students, we see a lot of them experiencing burnout. Now, this is for, of course, many high-risk underrepresented students as a whole, but especially with these student caretakers. The pressure of trying to balance both adapting to college and being a caretaker and then contending with all the changes of the pandemic often is just too much for the students. So the issue here is that, of course, higher education, our focus is always on ways that we can foster diversity and encourage those underrepresented voices. But the pandemic itself really highlighted how we are missing a chance to support some of these students that really are those key voices that we often don't hear in higher education. And that is underrepresented students, especially those that have a caretaking burden. So that was part of why we wanted to bring together this panel to really foster a conversation around what we can do and what kind of issues we've seen come up, and any way we can better support trying to help these students so that we don't miss an essential voice in the academic conversation by ignoring the needs of these students when potentially reasonable accommodations might help them to get through college. So what we'd like to do is split the group into breakout rooms so that we can really dig into the meat of this question and talk about some of these shared experiences. So with our current groups, let's go ahead and do two. 1 second, folks. Oops. Okay. Stop that share while I'm getting those breakout rooms going. Together. Thank you so much for joining us in that conversation. I think we came up with a lot of really great things that we can bring forward from here. So I'm going to turn it over to Deb so we can maybe summarize some of these thoughts, and I'll pull up that PowerPoint.
Oh, thank you. Perfect. All right. Yeah, and I think I'm sure, Danielle, your conversation in the breakout room, you have a lot to add to this too, so feel free to jump in. But students say they need understanding and empathy, which is nothing new, right? We all know that students, especially students who are non-traditionally aged or underrepresented or just first generation in general, need understanding and empathy. Although they often are not really confident about asking for that. Which is why, you know, in our program, we do what we joke about intrusive advising, right? We get reports on all of these students from all of their professors and conduct if necessary, that sort of thing. And so we don't let them get to the point where they have to ask. Very often we're right there. Danielle has got spreadsheets and we check in with all of our students. Yeah, she's really good with Excel on a regular basis. But I would say more importantly, once they leave our program, they stay in our program, but they don't have us as instructors beyond the first year. They do sometimes serve as mentors. So we do keep that advising going with our mentor students who come back, which is wonderful. But I would say a takeaway here would be in all other capacities, whether you're seeing the students in, you know, as a staff member or in a class as a faculty member, reaching out if you have any indication that that student might need support, because they might not reach out to you and ask for it. And I think our lives and the lives of students are better if we're understanding and empathetic anyway. And the student-centered approach, of course, and I'm sure, you know, a lot of you appear to be from Portland State. And, you know, I know you guys have the student at the heart of all of your decisions and practices, as do, I hope, all forms of higher education. We all should be student-centered, ready for the students that we're actually getting, not the students that we may have gotten before the pandemic. That is certainly a steep learning curve. I think we learned here at SOU is that the students are not the same. The students coming in this year are not the same as the students coming in the fall of 2019. You know, the world has changed, and we've had to change to accommodate that. And so we talked you know, we always have talked about being student-centered, but I think that now more than ever, we have to live into that promise, not just give it lip service, but actually be on the ground with the students, meeting with them when they need help. The reasonable accommodations that we would suggest, you know, we excuse students now for COVID, of course, you know, if they've been exposed or they've tested positive. But, you know, I had the situation where I did not get COVID, but my elderly parents got it in winter term. So because of our policy with exposure, I had to teach from home again for 3 weeks. And so, you know, I was able to accommodate my work schedule, and we need to extend that to students too, who are caregivers, because it might be that they are not sick, but they're exposed and they need to stay home, and they might not feel comfortable telling us that it's actually a family member, not them. Danielle and I have gone as far as thinking about some sort of a syllabus statement like we do for our military veterans, something that would acknowledge the role of student as caretaker, because it is so prevalent on our campus, and especially with our first year students, that that might be some way to address it and to make students know, just like we do when they have a documented disability or they have military obligations, those kinds of things, that, you know, it's something that we will accommodate if they come and work with us. So that's the main takeaway that we would recommend. So Tori, Dean of Students Office says, yes. And, you know, we're so glad we were without a Dean of Students for many years at SOU, and we brought that position back. And I tell you, our Dean of Students, Dr. Vath, has had to hit the ground running, because the minute she came onto campus, we were so excited because that was a glaring, you know, misstep for us. Not everybody needs to go to Tori for discipline. Some of those issues are so nuanced that we have that. Oh, are we running out of time? Oh no. Oh no. Danielle, you're muted, I think. Are you?
Nope.
Oh, you're not. Okay, great.
I'm just quiet. I talk too much anyway.
Yeah, we're both talkers.
Well, I'm happy to weigh in on some
Yes.
of the things our group talked about, if that helps.
Please, yes.
We had some awesome conversation. So there's those pluses, the things that we can do going forward that might help. And it's stuff like the reasonable accommodation, maybe allowing for things like Zoom meetings or work from home, or the accessibility. And that was a big thing that came up, the accessibility that maybe we didn't quite address as fully as we needed to in the past. The areas where our disabled students were already very much accustomed to having to make these adaptations. So now we're seeing more of the need for it overall. Other good stuff, making the pandemic making knowledge more accessible, so that students can attend a conference that they probably could not afford the airfare for. Finding new ways to connect. The amount of faculty here alone that has a Discord for their classes now is more than I ever thought I'd see. Some of the stuff to keep in mind, though, is yes, keeping that care and that compassion and all of that student-centered focus, but always within reason. So we're not experiencing that faculty burnout as well, because I think a lot of us get into this profession because we care about the students and we want to make a difference. So got to remember when it's time to draw that line and not care so much that you deplete all your resources.
Definitely had that issue last year when we were all online and had such high need that we didn't expect, I think, from our students. So, our group talked about many of those same things, Danielle. The access for students, especially students, single moms who had kids, that sort of thing. I know our department, our university seminar department, is purchasing more of the OWHE technology, so that in the classroom we can Zoom somebody in. It's not ideal, but it certainly allows people to attend, especially if they're in isolation. Right now, Danielle and I use laptops, or we have our mentors open up their laptops and try to Zoom people in if they can't make it to class for a reason. But it's the OWHE will be better. We can get those installed.
There you go. Okay. Well, I think we have time if anyone has any final thoughts, but we're just about that point to wrap up. Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. It was wonderful to brainstorm on this with you. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys.